Yo, yo, yo. You're first. Good job. You win. Hey, Gria, how's it going? What's up? What's happening? Yo. Crack those joints. Get the body fluid. So today, Study Monday. Nothing like still life. For those interested, still life is available. Just apostrophe ref. But this is the reference. Really beautiful colors, I think. That lime, yellow, that orange, red, and that blue. Some really, there's a lot of vibrancy happening. And I think that would be a fun thing to study. There's lots and lots of vibrancy. And I don't really know how to tackle it. I want to tackle it in a different way than I usually do. So I'm not really sure of how to do it. So we'll see really how I'll tackle it. I want to be textural. I want to be different than my usual stuff. And I'm really not sure how to do it. So we'll see. We'll see. It's going to be a little bit of a blind study. I definitely want to look at the color relationship, the vibrancy between them. I'm not going to go for accuracy to measure correctly. I want more the color impression, like the sense of power there is fascinating. Not sure how I will do it, but I guess that's a part of the fun. Hey Atzgi, Horzor, what's up? So week 1 has passed of Unreal Bjorn. There's lots of sketching going on, lots of thumbnails been shared. Just to reiterate, it's great that you share on Discord, but the only place it counts in terms of posting work in progress is the forum. The forum for hierarchy, or no, not hierarchy, archive. Archivical. Archivical? English. Just so we can track. Discord is great for community. I want to share something, a little bit of fun stuff that I usually don't. But I've been world clavicle. I've been world building on printer paper. And I've been drawing a lot of stuff. Kind of trying to craft a fun world. Lots and lots of like measuring, designs, notes, and this is only half of it. This thick, maybe 30 pages. So that's fun. Hopefully I'll be able to share that at some point, but I don't want to share that just yet. Damn you, Swedish. Just yet. Any Swedish person would say just yet. Just. Those soft J's. Swedish people don't have J. Just. Anyways, stupid. So we're here, study time. Let's do this. And anyone who want to participate in the study, please do. I'm going to try to capture the vibrancy of these colors. It amazes me how the red just pops out. So I want to try to capture that. I want to try to understand that. I want to try to reverse engineer the vibrancy. And I think one thing that it does do is it kind of has lots of saturation kind of around there. Let's go hard brush maybe. And some very saturated blues. Just kind of like around the red. Makes it really, really pop. One second, let me do it like this instead. Yeah. So I'm gonna have the reference open on my second monitor, just for you all to see, kind of, you know. So you're gonna see me do a lot more of this. But yeah, so this is interesting to see all you people doing all this hard work on Unreal Bjorn. I'm hoping you are having fun. I'm hoping you are applying yourself and learning new moves, new tricks. It's some really cool things, I'd say, being sketched out. And also, has to be said, there's been some discussions about a lot of things last week and this weekend. This weekend it kind of went a bit silent, but during the week there was lots of discussions about art and skill level and what you should and shouldn't do, what you should know and shouldn't know, and if you should learn on the job or not, and so on. It's a quite fascinating discussion. I didn't want to butt in to kind of, I don't know. My biggest worry was if I would start dictating the discussion. You know, it could easily happen if you know, people deem me as the owner. You know, they don't want the owner to step in and go like, here, this is what I think, and then everyone was like, all right, okay. So I was kind of just quietly listening in on or reading in on the discussion, kind of thinking myself of what I think, myself what my opinions about it was, and it was quite fascinating to see this kind of stark difference between people of what they deem one should and shouldn't do on the job. Practicing your ninja moves, Atsuki. That's great. That's good. So far, I must say, a lot of you have been quite open with your round one entries so far. Quite interesting. This year has been a lot more sharing. I guess you're gonna go a lot more ninja the further in the competition you get, which is understandable. I want to try not to blend so much. Like, there's certain artists, I've come to this topic over and over many times, but there's certain artists that are just, they just leave it. I'm so fascinated by that, and I so admire that ability to just leave paint as it is. Like, all right, it'll solve itself the more I paint. For me, in my mind, I was like, I need to define it. I need to control it. And sometimes it, you know, it ends up being overworked shit. And I think in this reference, it lends itself a lot to depending on, of course, what you want to do for studies. I mean, I am studying kind of like the vividness of the colors, and I'm not really trying to be accurate. I'm just trying to find the balance of these beautiful tones that the reference have, because in the reference they've really successfully made the colors pulsate, which is always, you know, a really hard thing to do. And nailing that vibrancy, for example, is something Craig Mullins does really, really well. He really has that nailed down to this kind of hue jitter of sorts in his paintings, where he has a lot of different hues next to each other constantly, and how they are applied they make the colors sing. You know, there is some fact about this. There are some rules about that, like how to make that yourself, like how to make colors come alive, right? And it's down to hue and contrast. Zialin, you're getting close to starting to render. Yeah. But I've noticed this in a lot of artists, that they don't really understand like how to make colors vibrate. I mean, I'm not saying I'm any master at it, but I've a pretty good understanding of how you can make colors come across more colorful than they actually are. And there is I'm not really sure about the technical name of it, but in my memory, there was many years ago, there was this discussion about magic grays. And like, if you would have a very limited palette, how could you make a color come across really warm, cool, different kind of cool, or different kind of warm? And with those limited ranges that you had at your disposal, how can you you know, manage that? How can you wrangle those colors out? And there was a lot of discussions about its contrast and subtle hue shifts, and you layer them in a way where they sit next to each other. And the way they sit next to each other, you can create this kind of, it's called vibrancy. It looks like the colors are talking to each other, and they punch a lot of colors to them. And you can definitely practice that, and it's a skill in itself that is really, really tricky to understand, of what you need to do to get that. But basically is, hey Miguel, how's it going? Mel, how's it going? Violin, yeah, for me it's also one of the favorite things with art is the color theory. For me it's really fascinating and really good fun. But the principle of what you got to do, like how color vibrancy works, right, is red and green, and you mix those together, and the vibrancy that occurs between those two, you know, it's like a magic war, like two wizards fighting, and it's like this energy there, right? But if you would put blue or blue in between, that could also, you know, enforce it even more. But if you start adding like orange or you know, the vibrancy there is absolutely different. Like between red and orange, there's not really a lot of war, but between orange and green, there's a lot of like tension, right? Like lots of vibrancy. So you could play around with that idea, and how do you intersect these colors, and when do you hue shift, or when do you want to hue shift versus contrast shift, and you can play around with these kind of treatments, if you may, and you could make like a color come across completely different based on what it sits next to. And like Gurney talks about this a lot in his kind of book for the realist painter about gamuts, and how you can create variety in your palette, but you still have to abide by a gamut mask, as in a limited range of colors that you're gonna operate under, because any painting does not look good when you go full blast on each color in each direction, right? You're gonna end up with a very noisy, broad palette painting that doesn't look appealing. So you want to harmonize colors, right? You want to make them sing. You want to have a range that is selected and has an appealing combination together. Like that's why, for example, I love this reference. This reference has a really beautiful palette. And palette being, you could almost, you know, if you would boil this down to a box of crayons, you know, you probably wouldn't have pink in there. So you can start like
I should say something
playing
smart.
around with the idea of, you know, like what kind of colors would you need? What kind of subtleties or dynamics between the colors could you use in order to get the exact result that you want, right? And you don't want in the crayon box every single hue. You want less difference in hues, but you want to be able to control them so that you can wrangle out different colors. And it's the same kind of principle as, you know, when you have a box of color pencils and you have brown, but you want beige. So you start mixing two colors. And depending on which color you use first, you get like a different result. You know, like you can lay a base of yellow and then your orange on top and then red on top of that, and then you get a certain end result with color pencils. So it's the same kind of principles. Like you want to push the colors you use to the extent that you can really vary them. And Art of Gym, thanks by the way for that raid. Welcome everyone. Hey Ice Die, how's it going? So Zeolin, yeah, exactly. But contrast. You could also do a very low contrast painting, but high hue contrast, as in the grayscale value is very flat, but you could paint a very interesting painting just by hue shifts. And for example, also if you quarantine colors or hue shifts, let's say this magic gray aspect, right? You quarantine certain colors to only hue shifts at the shadow, and you can start separating very low contrast painting only through to temperature. Like these are in shadow, so they're going to go colder. These are warmer, so they're going to go in the light, right? And you can start messing around with that. And especially when you come to illustration, there's a lot of that can elicit kind of emotional responses with low contrast or high contrast decisions in your painting. And you know, certain paintings won't look good in high contrast scenarios. Some paintings require you to have low contrast, as in the point of that is brightest to the point that is darkest has a limited scope, right? So you don't go full white to full black in your painting. Maybe you select your painting and your values are down here, only like 20% of the value range, but is a way more range in hue, or the other way around. You know, you can't just go all sliders to the right and hope that your painting will make sense in the end. It's really important that you try to arrange the information in a way that's appealing, and more cases than not, it requires you to control your palette, control your colors, and more so your value. And a lot of times in a painting, from a beginner, they blast everything up. There's not so much control over your hues and your values in your light. If you include light in your painting, you know, realistic lighting, then usually you go ham too much with the value, because you have colors involved. But you can't really, I mean, the easy thing is to make it into grayscale and only paint with colors or values. But then you lose the hue vibrancy, because, for example, you could make a painting with grayscale values really, really close to each other, but the hue shifts are massive, and you're going to have an absolutely different vibrancy in the painting, purely by hue shifts. So when you're painting, you really have to consider like how much information am I gonna lie in the hue shifts or the value shifts, or both. The more you paint, the more you're a traditional painter in the digital way, Bjorn. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I have to agree. I mean, in this instance, with this example I'm talking about, absolutely. These are a lot more traditional ways of painting. I mean, you could do photo manipulation or bashing or using 3D and so on and so on. But in the end, you still need to drag it through the artistic filter of what looks good and what doesn't look good, and that when that comes in, you can click on filters and let the pre-programmed understanding of color theory do its job. You could run it through color lookup or things like that. You know, run your painting through that and wish for the best. But the more you understand of harmonizing colors or understanding where a palette or a painting can go wrong, when you are finishing your painting up digitally and you want to give it some like post-processing, a strong understanding of color and treatment, and you could repair mistakes you've done purely by going in and after the fact altering the relationship between value and hue. A lot of times, you know, tone, which is more or less the personality of a painting, right? It strays as you're painting. You want, in the end, you want to give your painting a second pass yet again on, are my colors correct? Are my reds the red I want them to be? The blues the way I want them to be? Am I, punching the hue at the right places? Have I put effort into the delivery of my idea correctly? If you're painting a personal painting or Unreal Bjorn entry, and you really like, let's say, your colors, how do you capitalize on those colors? Let's say in this instance we were using this palette, right? And I'm painting my Unreal Bjorn 3 entry, and I'm like, okay, so I really love the vibrancy of this blue I've started on my thumbnail. How do I maintain that? And for example, like in this study, you could do a study even and find a still life that, like in this instance, this still life, right? And you could go, oh, how do they make the red so vibrant? And you try to break it down. Is it low value, high saturation? Is it how the colors are put next to each other? Is it the fact that there's grays? Is it the fact that there's lime color in there? Like what makes the colors come alive? Where is the hues and the boost in saturation? What are the actual colors when we think about that example I made earlier about red next to green? Like where is that occurring in the painting? Where is the calmer, more harmonized colors, and where do they vibrate against each other? Because if you take all sliders to the right and just max all the colors, it's going to look broken and it's not going to have the vibrancy. Pro 42. In this instance, I'm mixing. You can see now and then, like the marker changing, but that is when I want to have a color in between. But I'm looking at here in my painting and the reference on the other screen, and I want to boost with a more clearer yellow that's kind of like that. And I don't necessarily, now I accidentally sampled almost exact same orange, but the idea is that you can sample from the painting as long as you want to harmonize them, as long as you want to kind of even out the bridge between the colors, then it's okay to sample. But one thing you should always remember, digitally especially, is that this red, and let's say I add this red and that one on that one, and if I keep adulterating, that's the thing, right? I think that's what it's called. Like with normal pigment, you wouldn't lose like normal pigment, the color between that very red and that blue, what happens with Photoshop, it just desaturates because it doesn't have pigment in it, right? It doesn't gain or lose pigment depending on which color you mix into it, and different pigments in traditional paint act in a different way. So what Photoshop does is it just meets in the middle mathematically, like pixel value, they don't like, okay, red needs more juice because of the pigment, so that mixing with that blue is going to change more purple. It's just going to go even number, mathematical, like without artistic understanding or pigment understanding, or there's nothing in there except just meet in the middle. So when you're sampling from the painting, you have to remember that you are killing the saturation every time you sample. Every time you reuse that color, there's a huge chance you're killing the saturation. So, for example, what you probably might have noticed is that I go and sample a very high saturated area and reintroduce that to a color that's starting to gray out. But I could also go in and manually select the correct hue and saturation and value that I would need in order to create the exact vibrancy I want. And it's really important that you do that and that you don't oversample within your own painting, because in the end you're going to be have a very mushy color, and you can see it in this area. It's not clear because I've been sampling too much, and it's all just being kind of like in the same grayed out quality, which is not ideal, you know. And it's a really important thing to remember what Photoshop or painting programs do. I mean, there's certain painting simulating programs like Coral Painter, right? They took a lot of those things in consideration in how they blend colors. But at the end of it, you can't simulate real paint behavior in terms of pigment, because Photoshop is not a painting simulator program, really. We're using Photoshop as a painting program, but it is an editing program, photo editing program. So it's really important to remember when you're painting what oversampling does. Atsuki. All right, that's a very common problem with colorblind people. My suggestion would be don't use those colors. Why not? Captain Bose, yeah, exactly. Atsuki would have strengths in that. Value and light, yeah. But it's also not only value and light, but it's in conjunction with hue. It's really important that if you introduce color, that you are aware of what hue does to perception. We should actually do a study of this next study Monday. Low value, high saturation, and high saturation, no, low saturation, high value, and what that difference does. And another trick, for example, that I know Craig Mullins is using is like he jitters brushes between colors that are very close to each other. He goes into a specific. He has a specific hue jitter brush, but also settings and so on. But he has a brush that this brush doesn't really jitter the color. It only jitters the value, the brush. But you can easily do a hue jitter on the brush, and what it does is that it varies each color, right? I think I do have brushes like that, but I don't have them in that specific style. But yeah, look, so this is a color jitter brush. What it does that it samples the color you have and it jitters a certain percentage up and down. So you can create vibrancy that way by having multiple different color variations. You can get vibrancy that way. But there's certain settings also you can do where you can go from foreground to background jitter. The more pressure you have, for example, so you can have red to blue, and the more you push, the further the hue shifts. So you could create different versions like that too. So there's all sorts of things and tricks. Craig Mullins is a good example of someone who controls hue and value really, really well. So if that is interesting to you, if you want to like pick up a thing or two or study further, I strongly recommend try to find a high resolution version of a Craig Mullins painting and look at what he does with hue and value. Make sure you can desaturate his painting correctly. Correctly by doing hue and saturation, desaturation, and then setting the desaturation to color. And then you won't adjust the value. Photoshop has a tendency to desaturate different colors differently. So this way you're going to get a true grayscale value when you set it to color. And you can do that with Craig Mullins paintings and see what happens. And you can see in my painting too, like in this area, and this area, these high saturation marks, they disappear in grayscale. There's absolutely no information there that these marks are there. But when we switch on saturation, they come alive. So that's a really interesting, and you know that when you're painting grayscale, you should remember that too, that a lot of magic can happen with hue and not only with value. You know, it's easy to make contrast with value when you're painting in grayscale. You should also remember that you need to dial back value at points and make a hue shift marks rather than value marks, because otherwise your values are going to be all over the place. Ice dye, I do. Hey Brandon, how's it going? Captain Bose, yeah, absolutely. Sharsa, you are too late. Just in time to be late. Fantastic. All right, let's raid Max. Max is on. Good old Maxi boy. For a second, I forgot his surname. All right, we're gonna raid Max. He's an illustrator, extraordinaire. Make sure to give him some love. Have a good day, good night if you're in that part of the world. If you want to do this study, 'ref to get the reference. See you tomorrow for your topic, and I will paint it. Have a good one. Thanks everyone. Thanks for the raid. Toodles. Bye.